Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board, and this weekend was Free Comic Book Day. I picked up a couple of comics at the place I was at, and I thought I would just take a moment to talk about them because they're really interesting from the viewpoint of um, marketing and promotion. I'm also going to analyze the story and writing in this one in particular because I think it's a good example of a quick, solid introduction to a new IP. Um, and the other comic is an introduction to an ongoing IP. It's The Tick, which I'm not familiar with, but I thought really introduced me well. But I'm going to talk about that in another video. So this is Hope #1. It's from Source Point Press. It's written by Dirk Manning with art and letters by Kaylin Smith. This is a very interesting story. Source Point is just starting off, I guess, with their superhero line. I looked at their website, and it looked like this is the first title they've put in this series, this universe. I don't know if they're going to do a whole lot with this. This is supposed to be a 6-issue mini, and it looks pretty good. So this story is an introduction to a superhero world where superheroes have been around for about 5 years, and it's looks like it's got kind of an X-Men vibe going to it. The main character goes by the superhero name Hope. Her given name is it's in here somewhere. Julie. Okay. So this story has a lot of threads to it that you're probably used to seeing in terms of world building. Ultras, which is what they call their superpowered people, are kind of viewed with a little suspicion. It's not entirely clear where they come from. Hope is asked where she got her powers, and she just mentions aliens were involved. It's a one-panel throwaway. I don't know if they're going to do anything more with that. Honestly, I kind of like keeping the origin of Ultras a little bit mysterious. I've talked before about how in the Wearing the Cape series of novels, the origin of superpowers is never explained. You know when it happened, the event 10 years ago, but nobody has ever explained the event, and it's allowed to be mysterious, and it kind of sidesteps a lot of the deep theory crafting that I think a lot of comic books get caught up in. Another thing to note is that Hope does not seem to be a punch-em-up focused superhero. She, at least based on the little bit we've seen so far, she's a search and rescue hero. You can see here she's carrying an ambulance. It got stuck in traffic, so she picks it up and she takes it to the hospital. And of course, superheroes have always done search and rescue work. Superman is always saving people out of burning buildings, stuff like that. But it's kind of an interesting concept, looking more at that. Of course, shows like ER and there are a lot of other firefighter and EMS focused TV shows. So there's a lot of drama there. There's a lot of conflict. So there's good opportunities, I think, in that as a superhero concept. But I don't think that's going to be the main focus of the story. At the end, Dirk explains that he was kind of writing it with an Incredibles feel in mind, more of an interface between superheroes and regular society, and there's a lot of interesting aspects in that. Julie's family doesn't know that she's an Ultra, and so there's kind of some setup dialogue here. She's talking with her daughter and with her husband, and that's another interesting aspect. Julie is a mother. You don't see that a whole lot in most superhero titles. The most stable family life there was in superheroes for a long time was Spider-Man. Of course, they eventually chucked that. And then, Superman had a stable nuclear family for about 2 years, but that was told from the man's point of view. So this is another interesting perspective you have. You get a woman, and she's a mother, and she cares about her family, but her husband is kind of suspicious of Ultras. He's kind of, the stereotypical people with superpowers are bad. And I don't know if he's going to get developed a little bit more or not. He felt a little flat. He's not in the story very much, but that's okay. that's really like if I was to say there was the biggest shortcoming in the story is probably Mitchell, the husband. He just doesn't come off as he feels more like an exposition bot and kind of a cardboard cutout. Superpowers are bad. Again, he's actually in the story unconscious for 3 pages, so you don't get a whole lot out of that. They're in an accident and he's rendered unconscious, and he's out of the story after that. Now there is an interesting one of the interesting things I think they're going here is one of the things Lex Luthor is always going on about is that superhumans will make regular people lazy and unable to help themselves. And this story actually comes at that from an interesting angle. When they're in this car wreck, all these people gather around and gawk, and they're recording it with their phones. And since when they're in the car wreck, Julie saves her daughter by basically grabbing her and smashing her way out of the car before they get hurt. Everyone knows she's an Ultra, and so they just stand around with their phones recording it. And she asks why they're not calling for help. And finally, the driver of the truck they ran into comes up, and Julie asks, "Have you called for help?" And he says, "But you're an Ultra, aren't you the help?" That's a really interesting and, in my opinion, much more impactful way of asking the question: will superhumans make regular humans less able to fend for themselves? Because we actually see these people and they're not doing anything. Their initiative is hampered because Julie is there and she has so much power. They just expect her to use it to help out and solve the problem. They don't ask the question, is she in the right headspace? She's shocked. She sees her husband collapsed and passed out on the airbag. And no one thinks she might need a hand. She might need help because she's the most powerful person in the room. That's an interesting story aspect there. So she picks up the car and she flies it to the hospital. And long story short, she finds out her husband might not come out of it. And at the end, we get another interesting aspect to Julie. She doesn't know where her daughter is, and she's demanding to know where he is. And a guard comes up and takes her by the shoulder, and she throws him into the wall. She loses control for a minute. And this makes sense. Julie doesn't seem to have been an Ultra for very long, and she doesn't have any formal training. She probably is not very good at measuring her responses to things. And so she just flattens this guy. And this leads up to the reveal that her daughter has been taken by Child Protective Services, or what do they call it? Child Services Bureau, which I guess is CPS in this fictional world. And so on the whole, I think this book does a great job of setting up a bunch of stuff for the miniseries. It sets up the primary conflict. And the primary conflict is not between Julie and a supervillain. It's between Julie and the society around her and how they perceive her. And this is interesting because this is this is a female hero, and she has a very female conflict. Men very rarely think about how the world around them is perceiving them, but women think about it a lot. And so I think she's a very good vehicle for this kind of storyline. And she's going to approach this with a different attitude and a different level of awareness of these questions than a male superhero might. Another thing is it really sets up a struggle for her. Julie has all her support network taken away from her in this first book. Her husband is in a coma. And, how much of a support network was her husband? Because he kind of seems to have been really hard on Ultras. Well, it's hard to say. He didn't know she was an Ultra. So I'm willing to bet that, he treated her very well most of the time. Speculating here. They seem to have a pretty good relationship in the 2 or 3 pages we see of that. So her husband is gone, and her daughter's been taken from her. And even the doctor that she talks to at the hospital, who she thought was her friend, is very cautious around her now that he knows she's an Ultra. So we see that things are really stacked up against her. And hopefully they will ratchet even higher in the next volume or two before she really starts firing on all cylinders, and we can see how she solves it all. But it's also given us a lot of exposition. It's let us know about the world, and it's set up a secondary problem that we as the audience have to think about. The way people react to seeing an Ultra, the way they become very passive, seeing this person that they expect to just solve their problems. And that is an interesting thread that I hope will be woven in here some more. That the personal struggle is very interesting, and that larger societal problem is very interesting. And hopefully they will dovetail by the end of the story, and we'll be able to understand how in the future Hope will take this personal struggle and work it out in a way that benefits her and gives her some insight into how to correct this larger societal problem. It's really good that you have both of those potential threads set up. A small problem and a bigger picture problem set up immediately in your first story. The first part of your story is very important if you're going to have those two things dovetail by the end. Another good thing is that Hope is, she comes off very much as a rookie, and that's good because we're going to grow into her role in the world with her. And so all in all, really good writing. Congrats to Dirk Manning. And of course, Kaylin Smith has I think a very well-suited art style for this. It's simple, but with good coloring and nice bold lines. It is reminiscent of a high-quality cartoon or animated TV show, so it's well set up. If it should ever get adapted into that, we'll see there. But this is, I think, again, I believe this would have be aimed at a younger female audience, and this is a style that they tend to find very appealing. So all in all, I think that creatively this is working on all cylinders. A very good book, from concepting to setup to art. It all meshes very well. So I would, if I were to give this, out of 5 stars, I would probably give this 3.5 stars. There's a lot of stuff we've seen before in the story. It's executed on well, and so I have no problem with tropes or cliches that are executed on well. It loses a little bit for the husband. I feel like he is just a trope, and that does kind of rub me the wrong way, but hopefully that will be corrected in the future. And, on the whole, good, solid work. I don't know if this will be a classic as a character introduction, but I think it's the beginning of a story that has the potential to be very strong. So I like this a lot. Anyway, that's all I got to say tonight. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, there's a like button and subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.